Okay, so what we're doing here is the torso and the pelvis. The torso and the pelvis connect with a ball joint, so it's a 16.85mm ball joint, so that's the socket, and you use the 8mm or M8 connecting bolt, and that's the 16.85mm ball that's printable. This is a 40mm M6 bolt or M6 threaded rod. You can go a little bit longer than this, it doesn't really matter, as long as you've got 40mm at least on it, it'll sit well in that. The way that it goes together is you've got the main torso section, that slots onto there, you use an M4 to screw it together, you then take the connector bolt, you thread it through the waist section and it connects into there, it threads into this bottom piece. In the bottom piece there's a slot for a nylon nut, a lockable nut, and this is a little bit tricky to get in, so we'll start there. So once you've got it in like that, what I've found is quite useful is slot another bolt through it, screw something on, and try and pull it through the body, or press it through the body, one of the two. There we go, it's right set in the bottom of it now. So next step is these two little lugs here connecting to these two little holes here. Once you've pressed them into place, if you take it apart they will probably snap off. So if you're putting it together, make sure you're just putting it together for the one time that you put it together. You don't need any glue because the bolt will hold it together. So line up the lugs, so that's it pressed in place now. So this threads through and it threads into this bottom piece. So, but if we're going to thread that, we need to make sure that we put this connector on it as well. So thread that into there. There we go. So you've got quite a bit of play on the waist as well. This allows it to bend over and pivot to get that classic clockwork stoop that the Duke models have in the game. So that's that bit done. The next bit is to screw this bit into here. So again we'll just use an M4. So that's that tight. That's the torso and the pelvis assembly done. What I'll show you now is the part. This is part of the leg. This is the hip of the leg, and you just thread that in, pop another M4 in it, and screw that in place. And obviously you would repeat that on this side as well. And that's pretty much the legs fastened in. There we go. And that's that piece done. So we're putting in the ribs onto the torso. So at the moment I've got this disconnected. I've just got the hip or the pelvis ball joint, ball socket there installed, but we're going to put the ribs on. The ribs are orientated, so make sure you pay attention to which side is down. On my printout, the way that I printed this particular model was this side was down and it was flat on the bed like that. the auto suggestion is to have it like that. I've printed it both ways and it seemed a bit more frail when it was balanced on its edge, not surprisingly. So I've chosen to print it flat, but it does mean that the very, very tops and the very, very bottoms are a little bit rough. And you can see the overhang or the support points which have failed. But this bit slots in here, and you don't actually need to connect it with anything mechanical, because it actually, once it's slotted in, it clips in, and you can see it from the side. It's pretty close, so you just slot in that back part and tease it in. And it snaps in like that. That's it. That's rock solid. You've got these two mounting points here, which are M5 in size, but they're a bit oversized. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these M5 30mm bolts and slot them in there as more of a decorative piece, to carry a theme rather than to actually hold the ribs in place at all. One thing that you will note, if you try and put it in the wrong way round, it will fit, but the rib will point upwards, not downwards or horizontal. And that's the way you can tell if it's the wrong way around, because if you've got it pointing upwards, it will conflict with the body or the chest piece when it gets put in place here. So that's the big one. The rest of them do need to have bolts in to keep them in place, and these are M4 connections. Again, find the downside of it, line up the angles on the ribs with the angles on the body, and you'll be able to feel it with your thumb when you're sliding it around as to when it sits. So grab it in tight like that, and this is some M4 30 bolts. Again, these are the sort of hex nut tops, which follow the same sort of pattern as these. So again, these could be any M4 bolts, but I'm using these particular ones because I think it looks quite cool. On the prototype, I used the black M4 countersunk bolts on the back here, and it looked good too. So it's just up to you what bolts you've got and what aesthetics you want. I quite like this idea that it's just adding a bit of detail with the bolts sticking out the back like this, because the clockwork is supposed to be made of loads of random bits and bobs, so it kind of fits with the idea that it's made of random bolts and parts. And the smallest rib, you can see the smallest rib really leans down quite a bit more, but it's exactly the same. Line up the shape of the body with the shape of the rib, and install a bolt or two to secure it. For the chest piece, there's a little bit more to do, and we've got the shoulders to put in place, the little risers to put in place, a couple of clips, the shoulders, the plates, the shoulder balls to install, and we've already got the housings for the arms already screwed in. So the chest piece itself has got a lot to glue into it, as it's got a couple of glue in points for the shoulder plates, but the chest piece has got infill to go in here, 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 and on the back as well. But I'm going to do that after I've finished constructing it, so that it can just glue them in place, so that I'm not slowing myself down with gluing it in. So the way that this works is that the shoulder ball connects in from using the arc connectors, so using these little connector parts here, and the shoulder parts bolt through it using some of these, which are M40 30mm, or maybe 40mm. Let's try and try. Yep, they're 30mm, and it threads through the shoulder plate, the support, and into there. On these, they're very, very similar, but they're not identical. So I put a are in an arrow and an L and an arrow to show you which side they are on and which side they face. Likewise, the shoulders are very, very similar, but they're not identical. So you can't just flip it round and print the next one out because the holes are ever so slightly differently aligned. And then thread a couple of these into the shoulder plates. I think I might cheat on this. Use electric. Just threading it so that it's a little bit poking, so it's not quite poking through. Likewise, do the same thing with the next one. Also slightly proud of the top surface there, so that you can feel it when it engages there. Okay, so that's going through okay. So let's and you repeat the same for the other side. So that's those two parts fitted. Put in the clips. In this case, the bronze for the right arm and the silver for the hand, but slots in. Again, what's interesting about this material, the dimensions on this little lug here, it obviously sit in that housing there, and you can see visibly that this is too small. On the actual models, this is actually small enough to fit in here with a 20.2mm clearance, but in this particular material that clearance is lost, whereas in the prototype where I used a matte filament, that clearance was fine. It doesn't actually matter that much. So this bit here is for his head. We can't put this together until we've attached this to the torso, so we'll do that next. Okay, so what we're now doing is we've got the big torso, the chest piece, and we've got the torso, and the way that this works is there are two slots on the chest piece and a arc connector point in the back there, so we can take an arc connector and slot it into there, and this marries up with this piece and these slots here. You may notice again that these have been filed and sanded down a little bit. The final model will give it a little bit more tolerance on that, but again it's a material difference, and so you may have to mess around with filing and sanding and taking off the edges of this part, because that's easier to do than this one. But don't force it. If you try and force this in place, you'll probably break both pieces if they don't fit together properly enough. The other point is, if you put this in place now and you test fit it with that, there will be no space for you to be able to wiggle it back out if you're unsure as to whether or not you're going to be final fitting it or not. So don't put it together to see if it fits, because if it doesn't fit, you'll probably have to print these two pieces again, and these are the two biggest parts of the model, so it'd be a bad idea if you did that wrong. So I would definitely very, very carefully test fit this to here, and if it feels like it's like marring up at all, then pull it back out, sand it, shave off the edges. That's one thing that I found was quite useful, is to trim the edges off here with an edge cutter. Don't force it. So I'm quite happy with where we are at the moment with this build, so I'm going to put the arc connector into the body, and we'll connect the two parts together. See that hole there? That marries up with this hole here, and that's where the head socket sits into it, so that's kind of what we're hoping for. It's pretty close. It might have to be close enough. So you can see just on the edges there, it's not quite in as far as it needs to be, but it's now basically impossible to pull it out without seriously knacking the pieces. So we'll just have to try and push this and force this in. So that fits in there. Okay, and this pushes into here, and then the head pushes onto that. There we go. We'll do the head.